We're ready to go. Good evening, everyone. It's the 6 o'clock hour, which is the meeting. The purpose of the meeting is to talk about the Black Hills possibility of franchise. And would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Good evening. Councilmember Cochran? Here. Councilmember Gonzalez? Here. Councilmember Hamrick?
Here.
Councilmember Hawkes?
Here.
Councilmember Meisner?
Here.
Councilmember Turner? Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
Here.
Mayor Troutman?
Here. If you would like to talk to council, we'd like you to fill out a form and put your name on it and bring it up to our Miss Denise. And we'll give you time. I'll read the name off. You can go up to the podium, and I'd like to just have your name. The other thing is the rules are we're going to go ahead and time it. It's 3 minutes, so we don't have someone trying to take over. Because there's a lot of people who want to talk. So we'll set the timer, and you'll have 3 minutes. And I will call your name as we go through these and go forward from there. Could we get an update from our attorney, Catherine?
Sure. So the purpose of this meeting is just to have a work session with the public to hear about concerns about the franchise, and this is not first reading of the ordinance to approve the franchise. It's really just a time for public input, and so I think that's basically what we're going to discuss this evening.
Okay, thank you. And Brandon, you were one of the co-authors of this instrument. Would you like to say anything at this time?
Yeah, sure. I was going to introduce myself,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if that's appropriate.
Yes.
My name is Brandon Dittman. I'm an associate with the law firm of Kissinger and Fellman. Myself and Ken Fellman worked on this franchise. We negotiate franchise on behalf of municipalities kind of throughout the state of Colorado, and also in the states of Washington, New Jersey, and really across the country, in fact. And we spent a lot of time on this, using our experience with other franchise negotiations, our experience with Black Hills specifically, and try to get really what we think is one of the best deals possible for the city. And I can't stop my introduction without thanking Councilmember Hamrick and Councilmember Turner for their invaluable contributions to the negotiation process. And I'll be happy to answer any questions when those may arise.
Okay. Do you want to ask any questions from council, or should we go forward with the people that have asked to talk to council?
Well, I thought it'd be nice to hear some highlights of what this new franchise agreement could look like, some of the key points.
Okay.
Maybe give John a minute
Well,
to talk
before
as
that,
well.
Mr. Meisner put his name in my thing here. Would you care? Go ahead, Mr. Meisner. What?
This council has spent a considerable amount of time trying to get an agreement that kind of makes sense in the current scenario of energy. But more importantly, I just want to extend my wholehearted thanks to Caitlin and to John. We've spent a bunch of time as a council, but those two have spent a tremendous amount of their personal time negotiating with Black Hills, negotiating with the attorneys to try to get an agreement that best met the needs that we could given the circumstances in terms of the things that we're even allowed to negotiate with. So thanks to the both of you.
Okay. Do you have a button? Mr. Hamrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could, I'd like to set the stage here just a little bit, but I'd like to talk about, why do cities? I realize a lot of the members of our audience have educated themselves on franchises and electric utilities and the different mechanisms that municipalities can interact with those entities. But why do cities have franchises? The reason why cities have franchises is because the electric utility uses the public right-of-way to distribute their commercial service to the city. And because they use the public right-of-way, it's appropriate for a city to enter, or another municipality to enter into some type of written agreement, a contract. In this case, it's called a franchise, with that utility, to set forth the terms and expectations of both parties in how that utility will conduct a business. There's a lot of usual contract terms that you deal with, such as fees and terms, but typically one of the things that we did when we started looking at you know, how to negotiate with Black Hills, was looked at other cities. We looked at Pueblo, we looked at Lafayette, we looked at Hooper, we looked at Durango. We reviewed each of those franchises and saw where the common issues appeared to be, where touchy issues appeared to be, and recorded that so that when we entered into negotiations that we could have an informed position on that. In addition, Brandon and his firm were really greatly invaluable. They really made the difference for us in being able to get to where we did with this franchise. But some of the things you talk about with a utility, when they disturb property, how they will restore it, under what terms, what they're going to do. Sometimes you can talk about how they will restore service, although you're starting to tread kind of into an area where the Public Utilities Commission has authority. And that was something that we were made aware of and kept in the back of our minds as we went through these negotiations. There are things that we can negotiate with a utility. There are things that we cannot negotiate with a utility, such as their fees, such as what they charge their customers. But there are other things that we can. Some of those things include you know, general language about technological improvements. What if the utility causes damage? How is that remediated? What are the rules for that type of situation? There's a lot of information sharing that needs to go on, in my view, between a utility and a municipality, and a lot of times utilities are not very inclined to share a lot of that information. And so there's a lot of language in other franchise agreements that we looked at. And one of the things that I think that we achieved in this franchise agreement, which I think is pretty big, is Black Hills has agreed to notify the city whenever they make a utility filing about rates. So we actually have you know, something that a lot of other cities do not have. When the utility has to use city property, the terms of that use are covered in the franchise agreement. There's a lot of other things that are covered, like does the utility have to provide you with as-built drawings of everything? And in any negotiation, which this was, there's give and take. Where we ended up on that particular issue is that a reasonable written request for as-built with Black Hills would be provided, that they would provide those as-built to us. One of the things that Black Hills agreed to do with us, which I think is also kind of a unique feature of our franchise, is that when there are outages, that Black Hills would attempt to give us some metric as to how many, you know, customers were affected. The issue is that Canyon City cannot negotiate for Fremont County, and because the lines often cross those political boundaries as a matter of convenience and expediency for the utility to provide their service to customers, what Black Hills agreed to do is to let us know some metric that if there was a power outage, what, you know, how many people perhaps were affected that could be in Canyon City. We weren't asking for scientific certainty from Black Hills, but we wanted some metric, and they did agree to provide us to that. And I think that we've seen some of that in even though we don't have an effective franchise at this time, an agreement in place at this time, Black Hills has been a lot more forthcoming on providing us information on outages. The other thing that I would like to cover is that the Public Utilities Commission, electric utilities are really monopolies operated in the public interest. And because of that, because they're a monopoly, they are pretty heavily regulated by the government, both federal and state governments. State governments have Public Utilities Commission. Colorado has such a commission. And their authority is fairly clearly laid out in their enabling regulations. But the things that the PUC has authority in that the city does not include service areas, deposits for service, demand charges, transmission cost adjustments, reconnection fees, electricity rates. The things that the city does have some control of and can negotiate with the utility include the term, the ability to set a utility tax if there's no agreement on a franchise, access to the utilities records, what happens under a transfer of the franchise fee, restoration of service, excavation and construction, and installation and maintenance. So those were kind of the guide rails that we had as we went through this negotiation process. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smith?
I just also wanted to add my gratitude to Council Members Hamrick and Caitlin for their hard work on this. And also a gratitude to our citizens group. And you're the reason why we're here today. You came to us with your concerns. And I hope you will continue to join us in the conversations. We took your concerns and we put John and Caitlin to the task. We hired a specialized attorney. And we seriously beefed up that franchise agreement and listened to the suggestions that you had as we went into those negotiations. And that conversation still is alive today. And we intentionally wanted to get your public engagement as we move forward. We know this is a very sensitive topic with a lot of people's concerns, and it's important to us that we have you on board as we move forward.
Thank you. Any other council members? Okay, let's go ahead and start. George Turner is the first then. Reading as I received them, or I was given them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I appreciate your taking the time to listen to me. I built a home in 1981. It's a well-built house. It's a stick-built house. It's framed with 2x6s instead of 2x4s. I have double pane wood windows. I've recently put plastic over the windows on the inside, trying to get further insulation. So I've tried to be energy efficient in my home. I recently spoke with a couple of solar companies out of Pueblo West that were at the Home and Garden Show out at the Abbey recently. And they were good to talk to, but when I built the home, I put a solar system in the home and spent a little over $19,000 on the system, which I learned today is just a pittance, because what they wanted now is $45,000 to $50,000 for a solar system for my home. And I said, you know, I'm 79 years old. I can never recover that kind of expenditure, and so I'm not interested in a solar system anymore. When I built the house and put in the solar system, I put in an electric boiler as a backup system for my heating system. When the solar system was not satisfactory, the boiler became my primary heat source, and I have baseboard hot water heat in the house. I keep the thermostat at about 67 degrees, which is comfortable for me, but it's not overly excessive, I think, as far as heat is concerned. Anyway, Black Hills Energy sure got my attention this winter. In 2015, I spent $3,232.63 for electric energy for my home. In 2016, I spent $3,377.52. In 2017, $3,085.25. 2018, $3,301.72. And so far in 2019, I've spent $2,581.16 for electric power for my home. That's for 4 months. Now, when I compare the 4-month period of 2015, I spent $1,806.81 during that period of time. In 2016, I spent $1,980.22. In 2017, dropped to $1,710. 2018, the January through April bill was $1,755, compared to this year of $2,581.16, which I think is, in my opinion, exorbitant. And I wanted to bring that information to you so you can consider it when you're considering approving a franchise for Black Hills Energy. They send me a bill that says, we're glad to have you as a customer. And as you pointed out, it is a monopoly and I have no choice. And I just laugh when they send me a bill that says, we're glad to have you as a customer.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
George.
you very much.
Thank you. Andrea Stein?
Yes, that's me. I'm Andrea Stein, and I'm a Canyon City resident. And I've been a part of the Canyon City's Energy Future Group for some time, and we've been doing a lot of discussion and research. And so tonight, we'd like to give you some comments if we can. Basically, overview, we're interested in what your process is going to be going forward. And to that end, a number of the group has prepared comments, and they're all signed up. We want to know when you plan to put the franchise question on the ballot, if you have a ballpark as to when that'll be. We'd like to know when the readings of that will be scheduled for council. And what is your plan for education of the voters? So that's kind of an overview of what we're trying to find out tonight. And the next person who's going to be on your list, and I'm not taking the whole 3 minutes, is Kathy Worthington, and she's a retired Excel area manager. She has a lot of information about utilities.
Okay. Kathy Worthington?
Good evening, and thank you for letting us speak tonight. It's nice to see you. And John, thank you so much for all of your help in coming to our meetings. I thought tonight what I'm doing is just providing perspective as a utility inbred from the fact of spending so many years with the utility and knowing the culture of utilities. But what I wanted to let you know is that I retired in 2015, so I can't say what has gone forward from 2015 on. But in 2003 and 2007, Xcel Energy filed with the PUC, with the Colorado Public Utilities Commission, they filed notices that we were no longer going to wholesale electricity to Aquila, who is the predecessor of Black Hills. That was, and if I have my years right, Black Hills purchased Aquila in 2008. They told me consistently that when they purchased that multi-million-dollar utility, that they did not know that Xcel was no longer going to wholesale electricity to them. Xcel provided over 80% of the electricity that Aquila distributed. Now, my thought is one, they did not, either Black Hills did not do due diligence, or because they too are an investor-owned utility, and the best way to raise stock value is to do capital asset investment. So what they did is they built a gas generation plant in Pueblo. That is where most of the higher rates have come from, is you and I as ratepayers having to pay back for that infrastructure. And I believe they did it in the sense of knowing that what they were getting themselves into, and that unfortunately falls back on our bills every month. I also had the pleasure of being on the Pueblo Economic Development Council for quite a few years. And like Fedco, we tried to bring in primary industry and customers, or actually companies, to the community for economic development. I also, from that position, saw just what the impact of rates have on bringing in new customers, and actually new companies that will become customers. This has a huge impact on being able to continue with small business because it's primary employers that help to bring in the employees and also serve the community and be able to help those smaller businesses maintain and thrive. So that's why I'm here tonight, is just to let you know. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. Emily Tracy.
Good evening. I'm Emily Tracy, and good to see all of you again. And thanks for the time to speak with you about this. Also want to thank John, and if Caitlin were here, both of you would hear a lot of thanks, I think, from a number of people tonight for the time that you've spent with us as a group. Canyon City's Energy Future, as as others have mentioned before, came together more than a year ago. I kind of spearheaded that effort, partly because being a resident of both Canyon City and Breckenridge, I see bills every day at my two homes from Black Hills and from Excel. And as it was then, in early 2018, it is now, and that is that my bills here, where I spend a third of my time, are about a third higher than the bills from Excel Energy at our Breckenridge home. So that was part of our impetus of getting started over a year ago, plus watching what's going on in Pueblo, which we're going to talk a little bit more about tonight, that Pueblo is seriously looking at moving away from Black Hills. They have the ability to take what they call an off-ramp from their franchise within the next year or two, and we see that as a direct impact to what we do here. We also are happy to have the opportunity to really have a dialogue tonight. I hope that that will be the result of what we do. We know there's a changing energy landscape in our state, in our country, and we're concerned that if we renew a franchise, even for only a 10-year period, that we may miss out on some opportunities for some things that could not only bring our costs down on our electricity, but provide us some other options. We understand fully that the City Council does not impact what the rates are from an electric company, but those high costs that businesses and residents pay in this community is of concern to you because, as has been mentioned already, it can impact on economic development efforts, and we have pretty high poverty rate here in Canyon City, and it certainly has had an impact there. I'm not clear, when John and Caitlin brought us the draft franchise, one of the elements in there is an additional 1% fee for customers to pay. I'm assuming that's still in there, but I'm not sure because we haven't seen what you're looking at tonight. We've just seen what John and Caitlin presented to us. That's certainly a concern of ours too, that we're already paying high costs and we don't want to see an additional 1% fee added on. So we really hope to have a full discussion of this and many other issues. We hope that we can encourage the council to take your time in looking at what your options are and not just considering it as a franchise renewal without looking at the larger environment of what's available out there, what the choices are. So we are asking for time. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
And we have several others who are going to speak to the business issue.
Okay. Carol Dunn?
Hi, I'm Carol Dunn, live at 380 Barrett here in Canyon City, and I'm the former owner of Hilltop Market. And you've heard my spiel many times about the effect that the demand charge had on our business. The demand charge, just to review it a little bit, was if you went over a 50 kilowatt usage in any one time period during a month, whether it was a spike or an outage, and all your freezers, compressors came back on at the same time, that would give you over that 50 kilowatt charge. And that stayed for 12 months. In our case, it probably was on for about 14 as we went back to look at our bills. But that meant that I had to take the money that I could have used to hire some more people so that I could go on vacation, so that we could provide better service to our customers. We could not upgrade any of our equipment or our building as we would have liked to. And the outages often damaged our equipment if they'd come on and would be in a funny cycle, and it could damage the equipment. We lost business because of the outages, because if you can't see to cut meat, if you can't slice the meat, you have to shut your doors. So there were times that we shut our doors 2 to 3 hours before we had to on several occasions back in the summer of 2017. This is the way that an investor-owned utility, this is their attitude toward the business community, or has been here in Canyon City. And what they are out for is not necessarily satisfying the consumer or the business needs, but satisfying their stockholders. And I hope that as we talk to you and as you do have done research, that you have seen that the investor-owned utility is looking out for their stockholders and not necessarily the residents of Canyon City and Fremont County. Thanks for taking time to hear us tonight. Thanks to John and Caitlin for listening to us too. Appreciate it. And Rhonda is
I'll go ahead and call.
Yeah.
Thank you, Carol. I'll handle the meeting.
Oh, all right.
Thank you.
Oh, well, I just thought I'd help you out, Preston.
Oh, thank you. You want
Okay.
the seat too?
All
You
right.
can come up here.
I'm just trying to keep, where I'm at.
Rhonda, come on down, Rhonda.
I really like this timer rather than the other one that's up. This is less aggressive. Nice touch, like it. Rhonda Shirato, new address, take note, 542 2nd Street in Penrose, Colorado. No longer a Canyon City resident, but still fighting the good fight. My topic is, there is no doubt that Caitlin and John have spent an enormous amount of time working on this franchise agreement. We are very grateful to them for their many hours of hard work. I believe that the testimonies of some of these businesses here are valid to the point that we believe there's a little bit of misdirection with City Council in that fighting for a franchise agreement and negotiating a franchise agreement isn't necessarily all that we want. You're hearing about the rates, you're hearing about all of these high prices. I'll just throw in that my electric bill is now almost $49,000. Not to outdo anybody else here, but at Prospectors RV Campground, my electricity is higher than my business mortgage. That should say something to you. So even though we hired a wonderful attorney to fight and work through a franchise agreement, that's not all of our options. That's not what we're asking for. Our takeaway, we would like you to wait on this vote, because there are other options out there. And I'm going to mention something that I don't want to cause confusion, but wondering if anyone on the council or the attorney that helped work with this understands what an MOU is. I'm sure that Catherine would know what that is. A memorandum of understanding is a document and an agreement with a franchise that can go in addition to, for example, an agreement to work on solar. It could be a addition to the franchise agreement that makes Black Hills' feet held to the fire, that they're going to promise to work on something that has to do with solar. This is an example. Speaking for our Penrose group, now that I live out in Penrose, and the issue of putting a massive power line where they're proposing it, there's an alternative to that. What about battery storage? Yes, we need the electricity down here, but there's a different way to go about it than putting the line right through where people don't want it. So you've got to fight with the Penrose people. So I'm asking the City Council to be the hero, be our city and county's voice in saying, let's just not go to vote at this point. Let's take some time. Let's see what Pueblo does down the river. We call it downriver. And look at a couple of other options that we might be able to add to this franchise agreement to sweeten the pot. You're getting what you want, which is a franchise agreement. The people are getting some of the things that they want to hear and feel and see from Black Hills, and it's a win-win all the way around. So maybe the misdirection was simply that there's a different way to get our opinions and our thoughts into the subtext of the franchise agreement without having to change it all and go back to the drawing board, so to speak. So my takeaway, as my 10 seconds are up, is we're begging, no, we're not begging, we're asking for the commitment of council to please don't go to a vote yet. Let's discuss. Ashley said it best, if this is still an open conversation with Black Hills, let's discuss the option of these memorandums of understanding. They can be added, and there is some history that some future people will talk about, just to give you some things to look at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhonda. Jerry Fry.
Well, good evening, and thank you for hearing us. I appreciate all the assistance that we've gotten from council through John and Caitlin. If you're like me, you want to live in a town with a corner ice cream shop. I first addressed City Council just over a year ago, asking that you take the needed time to scrutinize what Black Hills is doing for our community as a whole before signing a franchise with them. The Cup and Cone is in its 7th year. We are a small generator of revenues that help run the community. My first year, Black Hills Energy increased my power rate 20%. My 5th year, Black Hills Energy increased my power rate another 15%. How much do you pay for an ice cream cone? Today, my power bill is more than my rent. Could you imagine your utility being more than your mortgage? I have suffered power outages that have made me scramble to find dry ice. I have suffered outages that have taken out my equipment that I've had to replace. I am here to appeal to your leadership for our city to help me and all the other very small business generators up and down Main Street. Slow down. Don't move on a new franchise too quickly. Don't tie us into another 10 years of this same behavior. I live here. I'm not leaving. The PUC says that Black Hills will have their profit. Nobody says that I'll have mine. I've been working with the Black Hills Business Relations Development Department for about 6 months now to monitor my equipment and find the best solutions that might be available to me through them. We've looked at programs to retrofit. They've directed me to programs with the state, the CPACE program in particular, which helps to, it's a funding instrument that helps fund the installation of solar. But my appeal to you is that if you want a corner ice cream shop and all the other small and tiny businesses and employers like me, then you need a more circumspect solution for the future. Please wait and take the needed time to investigate some of the green options too. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Buffy McFadden.
Good evening. Thank you, Council, for holding the work session tonight. A special thank you to Councilwoman Turner and Councilman Hamrick for your hours with the attorneys working with Black Hills to come to this franchise agreement, or proposed franchise agreement. My name is Buffy McFadden. I live at 320 Harrison Avenue, and I'm the former Chairman of Transportation Energy for the Colorado House of Representatives, as well as the former Speaker Pro Tem. And our biggest message from Canyon City Energy Future, I believe you'll hear it repeated, is to continue to take our time. As we know, Black Hills currently has an expired franchise agreement, and Black Hills continues, as they are obligated to provide service to Canyon City, even though the franchise is expired, and that doesn't change. As Canyon City goes forward, we're encouraged by the increasing number of businesses and the activity that are going on in our community. And I'm not telling council anything new, but we know our first plank in any economic development plan is to ensure the viability of the current businesses we already have. And I believe you've heard that from Jerry Fry and from Carol Dunn, but they're two people, but they probably represent hundreds. And we're encouraged by the businesses that are looking at Canyon City to relocate or to locate or to start new businesses here in our community. But one of the biggest avenues about deciding whether or not to have a business in a new community is the partnership with an electrical utility. We all know, and you all know, that a franchise agreement does not set rates for the utility, but the partnership we have allows them to go to the PUC and request rates. So there's a very active relationship, an obvious relationship, between a franchise agreement and how much one pays for their electrical utility. A partnership with our electrical utility is a long agreement. We're asking you to take our time. As we know, the marketplace is changing rapidly, not only here in Colorado, but throughout the United States because of technology, wholesale buying of power, and other ways to do businesses. We're encouraged by the number of partners who would like to be our partner in our electrical utility, aside from Black Hills. Please take our time. The question that hasn't been answered is what happens to our community here in Canyon City if the largest profit center for Black Hills, Pueblo, Colorado, leaves the utility. They're the largest in the entire system. That question hasn't been answered. What happens to Canyon City? It's important that we know that answer. Please take our time. Oh, thank you.
Steve Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity. My name is Steve Andrews. I live at 257 County Road 119 in Florence. I am a retired energy consultant, and I am, as a Florence resident, I'm also a Black Hills customer. I'm part of the group Pueblo's Energy Future that's been working somewhat with City Council and the Electric Utility Commission downstream to look at the options that they are currently exploring. They are, by a vote of 7-0 back in September, late September of 2017, they are studying their options to exiting their current franchise agreement. Under state statute, they can leave in the 10th year or the 15th year of their 20-year agreement. And that 20-year agreement, the 10th year is the year 2020 in August. Doesn't mean that they would need to leave then, but they would need to send a clear signal to their utility that they were going to leave. Pueblo's bill is $120 million a year. That's a good bit more than your 16 or 17, or actually 17 or 18 million dollars that your businesses and customers pay. There's $120 million a year for their electric bills. Their bills are the highest of the largest 20 communities in the state, means that they have a hard time competing for jobs. By comparison, I think you're the 44th largest city in the state, and I don't believe any city that's larger than, well, there might be one community that is larger than you are that has lower bills for a given amount of electricity for a residential customer. The status of the process down in Black Hills, in Pueblo, is that they have received a report, a phase 1 of a study from their consultants that identifies potential savings if they were to break away from Black Hills at approximately 10 to 12% a year. Those were actually, in the first draft, they were at 12 to 15% a year. They went more conservative. If they chose to break away from Black Hills, they would also have local decision-making power that might impact things like the transmission line that's going on between the discussion on the transmission line that you heard about earlier. Certainly whatever Pueblo does could impact the bills that are upstream. Close to half the customers in Black Hills service territory are in the Pueblo area. If they do decide to leave, that will in some way impact your bills, no question about it. So for that reason, we suggest that you wait on terms of signing up on that franchise agreement for the next 10 years to see what Pueblo is going to do downstream. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
I have a question
Okay,
for
Mr. Hammer,
Steve.
go ahead. Steve, come back.
I have a question. Perhaps you can share with us, or maybe Kathy, I'm not sure who knows, or maybe nobody knows, but do you know about the decision to not wholesale power to Black Hills anymore? What was the basis for that decision, or do you have any information on that, about how that happened, or?
I would suggest Kathy
okay, great.
respond to that. Keep in mind, there's one key distinction, and this is something that Buffy just mentioned. The rate of change in the electric utility industry, whatever happened in 2007, the marketplace today is dramatically different, and so the options would be equally different.
Okay. Well, we're getting out of order here. Do you mind if we ask Kathy to come back? We have Donna Murphy, and then we can do a redo.
So you don't want my answer right now that?
I didn't say that. I said Kathy's put her name in, or Donna put her name in. You can come back.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm just checking.
Donna?
Thank you for letting me address you today, Mayor and council people. I think one of the most important things I've learned in the past, 18 months, learning more about electricity than I ever wanted to know, I'm telling you, but that we won't lose service if we don't re-up with Black Hills. I mean, it's been since last November now, and we haven't lost our service, and we won't because it's state law. And I believe the service area from, I think, La Junta, maybe it's Lamar, to Cotopaxi is the largest electricity service area that Black Hills has. And all that money goes back to Black Hills and goes to the investors. In Texas, I have a girlfriend who's got a condo down there. They have competition between utilities, and you, the consumer, can choose who you're going to get electricity from. And I can't reemphasize enough that energy production is changing too rapidly to agree to 10 years. When I looked at that 25-year agreement from back in, I think, 1994, I was astounded. It was very hard to find because it had been with John Havens's records. And computers had changed so much to where Kathy Robbie, the city clerk at the time, had a really hard time finding it. But I'm in the county, I'm not in the city. But you are speaking for me too on this franchise agreement. And a couple years ago in Pueblo, when the PUC did a hearing, and it was 2 nights, and I don't know, Steve might have been there, but I went to testify, and it's three different people on the commission now. But the 3 that were on the commission, when I said who I was, and that they were making a decision for where I lived in Canyon City, they kind of went, whoa, you know, they didn't know that. So I just find that everything's very complicated, and I would recommend that we do not bring this to a vote of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Okay, Kathy, could you come back up and continue?
So before she answers, can you repeat the question again?
Sure. So my question was information about the decision made to not wholesale to Black Hills anymore. What was the basis for it? Maybe whatever you might be able to tell us about.
Sure. As I understand it, is basically in 2003 and even all the way into 2007, Xcel, projecting what their needs were going to be for electricity, said we need our power for our own customers. And so that was what was made. The decision was made, and you have to think that far out ahead, just like you folks do when you're planning for building everything that way. Unfortunately, of course, then we had one heck of a recession, and things changed, but at that time, that was after Black Hills had purchased Aquila and down the road, so we did not, we still made the decision not to renew with them, and at that time, Black Hills, I believe, decided that they didn't want to go with us anyway because they were going to build their own generating plant. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's all the people that put their names in to comment. Council? Ms. Smith?
I was wondering, Brandon, if you have any comments to make based on what the public had to say in some of their questions, or any clarifications?
I don't have any direct response, I guess is my answer. I just would say that, you know, as John kind of introduced at the beginning of this, the franchise is kind of a limited document in terms of what it can do. Things like rates, reliability, the types of electric generation are not something we are allowed to, pursuant to the law, to do in a franchise agreement. However, it's always the city's choice to be more active in the PUC or pursue other means to achieve those goals.
And I would like to point out, and you can clarify, but I believe in the franchise agreement, we did ask to be notified when they go to the PUC for a rate change, so that as a city, we can be a more proactive advocate for the citizens in going to the PUC about those rate changes. So that is one thing that we did, among many others, to help be better advocates to help with those rate changes.
Mayor Pro Tem, you're exactly right. Under this franchise, Black Hills is required to notify the city of any filing they make, whether it be the PUC or FCC or so on and so forth, which will allow the city to be more active in these proceedings if it so wishes. That's something that's not in the Pueblo franchise or other franchises in Black Hills service territory, and something that the city fought very hard for against Black Hills. And we think it's a real benefit of this franchise draft.
Right, I remember that Black Hills was very reluctant to add that into the franchise, and that was something we insisted that we do to benefit our citizens, to help them. And also another clarification, there's a lot of comments about, you know, wait, don't go to a vote. You know, they'll always provide service to us, which is true. But if we wait too long, don't we put ourselves at risk also not to get the $500,000 revenue from Black Hills for compensation for using our easements, which is a significant loss to our taxpayers and the services that we can provide for them.
Specific questions regarding the vote, I'll have to defer to the city attorney.
Yeah, that could potentially happen. We've been discussing, and just to say out loud, we haven't set first reading on this ordinance. We have not set an election. Council hasn't made those determinations yet. I think there is going to come a time when you're going to have to make a decision as to whether to move forward and to refer this ordinance to the voters or not to. Council will have to make that choice. First reading and second reading will occur approximately 2 to 3 months before the election, so there will be another lull in there between the passage of the ordinance, the referring of the ordinance, and the actual election. So, but yes, Black Hills is not obligated to continue to pay the franchise fee if no franchise agreement is in place.
Right, so that's a significant part of our decision-making process too. And far as one of the questions was, how are we going to educate our voters? And once we do readings or pass the first reading for a ballot measure, we can do absolutely no education as a city council or local government on educating voters, just for that clarification.
Mr. Hamrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to touch on two things. One is the 1% fee for undergrounding. And the approach that we took there is if you look around Canyon City, especially if you go down some of the back alleys off of Main Street, we've got a pretty horrible situation there with power poles sitting on both sides of the right-of-way that really restrict vehicle traffic down those. We have a lot of wires that are visible there. The idea was that if this provision had been in our previous franchise agreement 25 years ago, that as the city went through those alleys and repaved them, that we would now have underground service in those areas. One of the things that we did achieve in this agreement is a lot of, some franchises are silent of the ones that we looked at on an undergrounding fee. Some franchises actually, that when the agreement terminated, that money went back to the utility. One of the things that we achieved in our franchise agreement is that if the agreement terminates, that money goes back to the city to be put to use for the citizens. So that money actually belongs to us, and by us I mean the city and our residents. And one further thing I'd like to say about that is that in the agreement we negotiated with Black Hills in good faith, and they came down. We actually requested the vice president to come down, and he brought a team with him, Jim Seward and Julie Rodriguez, to sit down with Caitlin and I. We did negotiate with them in good faith. We felt they did the same with us. So if the 1% fee is a stumbling block to if when the council makes the decision or not to put the issue on the ballot, if that is a stumbling block, we feel that since that is something the city has requested, that we could ask Black Hills or tell Black Hills that we're going to remove that particular section from the agreement. And since that was at our request, we feel that would still be in good faith. But in the overall scheme of things, my personal opinion, it's kind of being a penny wise and a pound foolish. That if we don't have this fee, the only way that we're going to be able to clean up some of the electric lines that we have around town is to pay for it. And because Black Hills certainly won't volunteer to pay for it, and that's the only mechanism we have to do that. But if this became a stumbling block, that is something certainly that our option, we could tell Black Hills that we wanted to remove that particular section from the agreement. And Brandon, I have a question for you.
Yeah, of course.
Have you seen, what has your experience been with side agreements or MOUs with electric utility companies outside of the framework of a franchise agreement?
Our experience with electric utilities and gas utilities specifically is that is not an option. It's common practice in cable franchises where there's looser regulations around that particular aspect of the franchising process. But I am not aware of any city in Colorado in the recent history with an investor-owned utility that's entered into a site agreement. There are other options potentially that can be worked out, but a site agreement that's contingent upon passage of the franchise is not something I've personally seen, and have probably done 90% of the franchises in Colorado in the past 10 years.
Thank you.
Okay. Emily would like to talk. So we have two people in the queue, Emily. Would you cede your time to Ms. Tracy, Frank? Come on up, Emily.
Thanks, Emily Tracy. I wasn't sure how we were going to get that dialogue going, which is wonderful to have. I wanted to just touch on several things that have come up. There was a few minutes ago kind of the suggestion made that maybe the city would lose the money, the $500,000 or whatever the exact amount is, from the franchise fee. There are mechanisms if Black Hills, for some reason, if the franchise isn't renewed, they're still providing electricity to our community. And if they, I understand they haven't done this yet, but if they came to the city and said, we're just not going to collect this anymore from our customers, there are other options. And, for one, the city of Boulder some years ago decided that they were not threatened by Xcel at all with removal of that fee and that revenue. But they decided to just preempt that issue when they did not renew their franchise with Xcel, which is some years ago now, 8 or 9 years ago. And instead, they just put a replacement fee on the ballot for their voters to vote to collect that same amount of revenue, and that has passed and has passed several times since then. And so I think it's a mistake for any of us to kind of plant a little seed of fear into the city that that money would go away. There's ways for that money to continue. I hope Black Hills would not threaten to not collect it, but there is a utility occupation tax that could be a replacement for that. I wanted to touch on the 1% undergrounding fee too. I'm not sure if you're thinking, John, or the rest of council, when that might become a barrier, or if it did, whether that's at first and second reading, is that when you would know, or when it's on the ballot? I'm not sure how that would work. But again, I think the concern for many of us is we already pay high costs for electricity here, and so that's putting another 1% on the bill of the customer. What I would like to hear, and I think a lot of us would like to hear more about the connection with what's going on in Pueblo. And if Pueblo decides in the next half year, whatever, that their consultants have given them some really good information and that they want to move away and do something different so that they can lower those costs in the city of Pueblo, where does that leave Canyon City? I think that's a much bigger issue than the franchise fee and what may or may not happen. And I wanted to touch on MOUs. One area that they have been used, I know with Xcel, if not others, is there's been this effort around the country and in Colorado to get cities to commit to going to renewably produced electricity within a certain amount of time. Breckenridge, town of Breckenridge a year ago did an MOU with Xcel to that end and spelled out kind of how they were going to get there, what that pathway was going to be for Xcel and for the town of Breckenridge. And many other communities have done that too, so they're not that unusual. That's a particular use for that.
You look like you'd like to respond, Brandon?
Yeah, I can try to respond to a few of those points if that's council's desire. Regarding the last point with Breckenridge, we'll call it an MOU for now, but that was in regards to a tariff program that Xcel was running to allow cities to sign up for renewable power, where individual agreements were struck between cities. It wasn't an MOA or MOU subject to a franchise. It was a separate program done under a PUC ruling which allowed for that to happen. And so there's all sorts of other types of agreements that the city could potentially enter into, but typically not done and associated with a franchise, to my knowledge. The other, I think, with regards to the undergrounding fee, I think as John kind of highlighted, it's something that is in a lot of different franchises, not necessary, but I think in our experience, we've seen it's actually saved cities a lot of money over the long run and increased reliability as you put more facilities underground. And so it's certainly an option. We thought it was something the city might like, but it's up to council's discretion whether that's something that it would like.
And Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I'd just like to say, the Emily will know that the 1% fee is out when the citizens line up with tar and feathers. So I think
Well, we'd like it to not come to that for you all and for the rest
I
of
agree.
us.
I agree.
And I'll just comment, if I can, just real quickly on the MOU issue. It's kind of a distinction without a difference, maybe, because you wouldn't have an MOU between Xcel and the town of Breckenridge if there weren't a franchise in place, I don't think. And so they kind of tie together that way.
If I may, you're correct. That would not happen if there were not a franchise. But that MOA in that case is only possible because there's a PUC program authorizing it.
We understand that.
And so in this case, we would have to have a PUC program, a similar PUC program for Black Hills, authorizing the entry into that kind of agreement.
Right. Which, of course, Black Hills could do if they chose to.
Yeah, they could. They could bring such a filing to the PUC, and the city could always advocate for that kind of filing to be brought.
Okay. Mr. Arquez?
One thing I want to bring up here is I'm glad that a lot of people understand the fact that we as a city have no ability to say what Black Hills can charge everybody. That's at the PUC level. But getting back to when we knew our franchise was getting ready to expire, at that point, that's when this council decided that we need to have somebody look into the working process with Black Hills and us. Thus came John, and Catlin. Those two folks stepped up to the plate, and they said, we're willing to do kind of what we was looking at. And we appreciate it, and they've done a fantastic job. And the reason why I bring this up is I want everybody to understand this isn't something that we haven't thought about wholeheartedly. This isn't something that we said, let's do it overnight. No, when we've had meetings after meetings with those two folks, briefing us up along with the attorney, letting us know where things are standing. Black Hills has worked with it. And if and when it comes time to look at the franchise extension or not going that way, we as a city, and I'm sure they'll continue to do that, we will look at every avenue that we have that can benefit the residents of Canyon City, the businesses of Canyon City, and that with regards to the ability we have. There's going to be some things that we have no control over, you know, and unfortunately, that's the way a lot of this stuff works. You know, federal government, state government, city government, you know, they never unite on one specific thing. But this council, before we decide to take this to a vote of the voters, will look at every avenue that we can look at. And part of this meeting that we're talking about here has brought up other things that we can look at. Yeah, Boulder did something, but Boulder's got bigger pocketbooks than we do. Breckenridge did something, Breckenridge got bigger pocketbooks than we do too. So when we come down to these things, we have to look at what is going to be, once again, the best that we can get for the residents of Kansas City and the community to try to get people to come in here. It's not been a rushed process, and it won't be a rushed process. We're going to continue to look at it at every aspect that we have to. Be assured of that. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Cochran.
Ashley touched on it just a little bit, but I know it was brought up earlier as far as the city's education of voters when this goes to a ballot. And I was hoping, Catherine, you could kind of elaborate on that a little bit more, just so that everybody's on the same page and we understand why it's so important that we iron out all of these details now and have the public support going into this because of our restrictions moving forward.
Sure. So the restrictions that Mayor Pro Tem Smith mentioned were the Fair Campaign Practices Act prevents the city council as a body and the city itself from funding any kind of education for the ballot question. And this is the case with any ballot question. So once they pass it on first reading, they are basically cut off from doing any public education as a body or the city spending any city funds to do so. They can do that on their own time if they so choose. So I think any education, if council decides to undertake that, would have to occur before first reading. That's been our recommendation to council. So is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, you acted like you would like to address us, so. Yep. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you,
No,
Mr.
back
Mayor.
up. Sorry. No, no.
Head
No,
fake
you're-
left, head fake right. Two points. One, on the Memorandum of Understanding, the National Renewable Energy Lab is writing up 4 case studies right now on franchise agreement and MOUs that are going together. They've already happened around the country, and they're doing the study work on it to write them up, to circulate them. So just to let you know that that is, again, it's part of the rapidly changing landscape of the utility industry. And it is rapid. Those 2 investor-owned utilities in the state that you have worked with, Black Hills and Xcel, no, they haven't done anything that I'm aware of like that, but there's no reason they can't in the future, and I think they'll learn from these case studies. The second point is about the decision-making power. It's all up there in Denver, or it's in South Dakota. It doesn't have to be that way. There are 2,008 communities in the country that run public power systems. The decision-making moves locally, and that's what Pueblo's looking at. They're looking at I think the 3 major benefits of public power are decision-making becomes local rather than remote, and so you don't have to pay for Black Hills lawyers to argue against your lawyers up in Denver at the PUC. That's what happens now. Would that be a fair statement? We pay for their lawyers to argue with our lawyers on decisions that we would like made locally. Reliability, in terms of reliability, the system reliability for public power entities around the country is higher than it is for investor-owned utilities or rural electric cooperatives. It is the highest of the bunch. It's about 65 minutes an hour outage, 65 minutes a year of outage, compared to about 130 minutes of outage for investor-owned utilities. There is an advantage behind that, and that is that the municipal electric utilities are more concentrated than some of the investor-owned utilities, and certainly than the REAs. And the last thing is rates. Rates for public power entities are the lowest in the country. And that's true in the state of Colorado as well. Of the 22-some municipal power companies, they have the lowest rates. By comparison, Black Hills has almost the highest rates in the state, and there's very little incentive in the regulated monopoly environment for that to change. So just those 2 points on MOU and why Pueblo is looking downstream at maybe a public power form that could be like an enterprise like Pueblo Water, something like that, that's not run by the city, but it is owned locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Mr. Meisner?
Two-part question.
Sure.
First, is the this is maybe directed at Catherine. The utility occupation tax, is that a viable option?
I mean, that is, yes, you could levy that tax. We've talked about that before. It's been probably a year since we have. But it's subject to Tabor, and the voters have to approve it.
So relative to that, taxes in Canyon City elections don't go well together. And it doesn't matter. People see tax and they immediately have a tendency of voting one particular way, which anybody that's lived in Canyon City for any amount of time knows that. So I think we need to be real careful to make the assumption that people will automatically approve a utility occupation tax, because I don't think that you can make that assumption. So there's a risk just with trying to get that tax approved. Without a franchise tax or a utility occupation tax, we run the risk of significant changes in our Canyon City budget, which realistically doesn't affect this council. It affects the people that are on the other side of that, on the other side of those seats. Those are the people that are going to feel the direct impact of a reduction of $500,000. So just keep that in mind, that those are real dollars that are currently being spent for taxpayers that would no longer be available, that we would have to make adjustments to in our budget, that we would in fact have to make. The third question, I asked two-part, but I don't know whether Steve or Kathy can give me an answer, but let's make the assumption that tomorrow the city of Pueblo decides to move forward. Is it realistic, and I say realistic, that they're going to have a public, or however you want to call it, utility in place providing power to the Pueblo residents within 10 years? And maybe with that question, what makes Pueblo different than Boulder?
Lots of things, and I'd rather not get sidetracked there, but I could. The tendency for the breakaway utilities that have done it successfully around the country, and there have been about 40 in the last 40 years, the tendency is, the process varies speed-wise. It depends is the quick answer. Maybe I can give you a couple examples. Hermiston, Oregon, did it in less than 2 years. They used to be, I think it's Puget Sound Power up in Hermiston. They did a deal so that the neighboring electric cooperative, Umatilla REA, provides all their operations and maintenance. The city hired one guy to deal with wholesale power in the wholesale power markets. And that guy also ran a demand-side management program. So It was a pretty simple transition for a community that's around 10,000. And that happened fairly quickly. Don't quote me on 2 years, but I think it is in that range. If you'd like, I wrote a case study on it. I'd be glad to send you the case study. I've written case studies on a number of these successful breakaways. Winter Park, Florida was another one that broke away. It was more like 30,000. It's sort of halfway between Canyon and Pueblo. That took a few years. I'm thinking they had their election to break away in 2005. And they just celebrated in 2015 their 10th anniversary, and they said it went pretty well, the breakaway process. Originally, what they did was they hired an outside entity to run the operations and maintenance on a daily basis, and billing and customer relations and everything. They actually hired Enco Services from California, somebody who's traveling minstrel who will provide that package to you. And within 10 years, the city took over the full operations, and they still do so. As to Pueblo versus Boulder, I think we're learning from Boulder's problems. It's a much different circumstance. Don't forget that Pueblo is close to half the load of Black Hills, whereas Boulder is about 3 or 4% of the load of Xcel Energy. They're the tail trying to wag the dog. A couple other differences are that in Xcel territory, the motivation to leave had to do, frankly, with green power initiatives and wanting to be more green energy focused, wanting to have 100% renewables over time. In Pueblo, it's mostly about economics. It's also about mistreatment, past in particular, mistreatment of customers, and in particular the low-income community. They're trying to patch that up. They're doing a reasonable job on one front, but it's a shell game there. They're having troubles, I think, successfully trying to cover up, patch the old potholes of relations with a lot of customers. I would also point out that Pueblo is trying to do this on a state statute basis in the on a 10-year, at the 10-year point. And the franchise agreement won't have expired as it did in Pueblo. So there is, as it did in Boulder. So there's no need to do the franchise fee vote and that sort of thing right away under what's called a CPCN, or Certificate for Public Convenience and Necessity, through the PUC. Black Hills has to keep supplying power and until a new agreement is in place with some other entity.
Okay, Ms. Smith?
Well, Jim took my question, which was a really good question. And I just maybe want to articulate the point further, and maybe Brendan, get your perspective on it as well, if you may. So Black Hills voted, 8 to 9 years ago to break away, and they're still in the process of becoming an independent municipal utility. Pueblo right now is still in phase 1. In a couple of weeks, they're going to vote to see if they want to continue to phase 2. Their agreement doesn't expire until 2020, and the time it takes to make those decisions, to take over utility and provide electricity to a municipality, we could really quickly get to 10 years quickly. And even if we vote for a franchise agreement for the next 10 years, it doesn't mean we can't at some point join with Pueblo. Is that right?
That's correct. The franchise agreement we're proposing does preserve the condemnation powers of the city. As has been kind of alluded to, there are some state statutes that govern the condemnation of utility property. Those are currently being litigated by different cities other than Boulder and Canyon City as to whether they're even constitutional. Because this process, not just in Canyon City or Pueblo or Boulder, is fraught even for smaller scale acquisitions of utility property. And so even on the state statute side of this, it's a quickly evolving landscape as to the rights of municipalities to acquire utility property.
Ms. Gonzalez, thank you. Are you done, Ms. Smith?
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Gonzalez?
First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. I haven't been able to speak, or I haven't spoken much tonight, but I want to thank everybody in the audience, and especially John and Caitlin for the amount of time that they've put into this project. But I have a question. I'm sitting here listening, and pardon me, but I'm a little bit ignorant on some of this stuff. But my question is, if we decide to go with a public utility, who's going to pay for this? How is this going to get funded? And how will we fund it if we don't have $500,000 coming in from a franchise agreement? Can anybody answer that question for me? Are there other solutions out there that can help fund this kind of project? We have a difficult time getting taxes paid in this community, and I just don't see. Enlighten me.
It's certainly at the forefront of virtually everyone's minds who's tried to get their mind around this issue. There are several ways to do it. One way is to hook up with a set of third parties. I'll throw out an example. Someone like Hermiston, Oregon did, but you partner with a wholesale power provider. There are several of them that expressed interest. One of them that is in the news in Colorado is Guzman Energy. Another one's Tenaska Power Services Company. The latter is an $8 or $9 billion a year company. They're hooked up in turn with Capital Dynamics, who writes big checks for very large solar applications around the country. And Capital Dynamics has come here to to Pueblo a couple of times and talked with both the public and with Pueblo's Energy Future. If you can imagine this, they could write a check to buy out the system, and they will save enough in wholesale power, the difference between what Black Hills charges you for their power and what they can buy it for on bilateral agreements on the market. They can save enough money to both make a profit for themselves, because they are for-profit entities, and have the citizens save money on the utility bills, as long as they're partnering with yet another entity, which would be somebody like, say, San Isabel, a neighboring REA, who has a lineman in place, and the guys who wear Black Hills hats and shirts and drive their trucks today, once upon a time had Aquila logos on, and they could have Pueblo Enterprise on their Enterprise Power or something on their logos, so that you could have partnerships with somebody who can write a check and someone who can provide services, and at the end of the day save money compared to what you're paying in your rates today. I don't know if I explained that well enough.
You did, thank you. But when we get down to the nuts and bolts of it, aren't we looking at more agreements than we would be if we were just using a franchise agreement?
One of the differences, though, is that entity, say Hermiston, Oregon, or Winter Park, Florida, or all the other case studies that I've written, looked at, and so on, the decision-making power moves locally. Now, I would recommend in Pueblo that it be to an independent board run by somebody like Pueblo Water. Pueblo Water has experts on that board that do nothing but focus on water, as opposed to dumping it in the hands of city council. So I would say that you can create a structure that gives you local decision-making power and some confidence in that power, and develops expertise in that organization, while getting wholesale power that saves you money from the markets, and getting service and maintenance from the same guys who are doing it today tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Jaquez?
Okay. We've heard a lot of this about Oregon and everything else and everything, but you still didn't answer Mrs. Gonzalez's question. She said, who's paying for it? And if this outfit that you mentioned, they can write a check like that and take over, why haven't they done that in Pueblo? So you make it sound like it's such a simple, you make it sound like it's such a simple process, but it's not a simple process, okay? Everything that you've mentioned would require research, would require more time to be spent and everything else. What she wanted to know is who's going to pay for all of this research, all of this extra stuff. You never said that those companies said, we'll do this and we'll pay everything. You don't have to pay a penny. And that's where we have to look at, because it'll be our money if we have to go a route away from what we're doing. It's not going to be anybody else's money.
Okay, let me describe one then, a very concrete example that's nearby. Kit Carson Electric, REA, broke away from Tri-State. When they did that, they got a $37 million bill. Guzman Energy wrote a check for that. That's being paid off by electric ratepayers. It was going to be paid off in a 10-year period, but they decided not to do that. They decided to accelerate it. It's being paid off in 6 years by simply the same level of bills that were previously paid for. So you take the money to pay for it out of your electric bill. It's very much like a renter paying, instead of paying rent to a landlord, they go to the bank, get a deal with the bank who writes a check to the current owner, and then you own the house.
Okay, but I don't want to really interrupt you, because you said the other company paid for that. You still haven't said who's going to pay for it, so we don't have to put any money of our taxpayers' money in there. Nobody has come to us and said, if you guys break away from Black Hills, we'll write you a check so you can go independent. That's the key. That's the key.
You can't ask, utilities can't come in and do that. There's something called tortious interference, is my understanding, and I'm not a lawyer, so I'm getting into water over my head, but you can't, other utilities can't come in and interfere unless you invite them.
And I understand what you're saying, but what I'm trying to get across is it's not a simple process like you, I don't think you're attempting to make it sound like that, but it's not a simple process that we can just say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. It's a process that we've been working on for a long time to make sure we go down the right path, okay? Nothing in this thing, I don't care whether you're dealing with an electric utility or a gas utility, it's not a simple process to look at. And we realize that, okay? That's why we're doing whatever we can to make sure when we get to that process and when we have to go to the voters to say, this is what we want, we can be educated enough to educate them so they understand everything that we've done to make sure we're taking care of their best interest.
I would have to point out that I've only have a limited amount of time to keep your attention. Somewhere around 10 minutes, I've probably exceeded it. I can't possibly expect to be able to share in an organized way, extemporaneously, where I think this might go in a way that would do that in 10 minutes. I've been studying it for 4 years with Pueblo's Energy Future. I go down once a week, and we do a lot. It's a part-time job for me, and I'm retired. I don't get paid a dime for it. So I apologize for if it sounds as if it's quick and easy. I'm very aware that it is hard and difficult, and that you've already spent, through John and Caitlin's good time on this, you spent a lot of time working on a franchise agreement that frankly is outside the bounds of almost all the remarks I've just delivered, both about Boulder and about Winter Park and Winter Park, Florida, and Hermiston, Oregon, and so on. All of those remarks deal with questions that are outside of the franchise agreement that wasn't something that you folks tried to wrestle with, and I can understand that.
Okay, Ms. Smith?
I was just going to suggest that I think we've really covered a lot of bases this evening. But one of the main questions, and maybe hoping to kind of wrap things up, was when will we have the readings and when will it be on the ballot? I think we need to kind of have that discussion a little bit so they can know. We already know that the readings have to be 60 days before it goes on the ballot. Is that correct?
We would like to see it more like 90
days.
closer to that, just for ballot printing and all that. And, you know, if we're having a special election, if we're doing a coordinated election, that's all going to change that. And I mean, you can make that decision tonight if you'd like. You're certainly not required to. I think there were some outstanding questions you had for us, legal ones, which we're going to be providing to you. So you may want to wait for those until you make a final
Right,
decision.
so really the soonest we would even consider a first reading would probably be in August, and that would be for November ballot.
We'd probably want to push you into July.
Into
I think we
July.
have to notify the county. I think the date is at the end of July that we will be coordinating an election. You already have a regular election in November, but we like to let the county know, you know, we're going to have this additional information you're going to need to get on the ballot. So we like to let them know as soon as possible. So.
Right, and I know we want to wait as long as we can to do that first reading, because we want to take advantage of our education period that's allowed. I guess I'd like to know what the climate of council is, just, I mean, because July is coming quickly. If we want to go to November or pause and wait a little bit longer and do a special election.
Okay, we have two people holding. Would you cede your time for, Emily, would you like to speak again?
I have a quick comment, if I
Sure.
may, and a quick question. I'm not sure if I understood. I want to be sure I understood. You're talking about a time frame where the ordinance would not be introduced for several months. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
So we're kind of, when you have an election, and this will get into the nitty gritty, you kind of back into a calendar of certain
Sure.
deadlines you have to meet. And so depending on what type of election it is, depends on when council should do their first reading and second reading. And
Right.
so we're kind of talking about when those things should occur.
Whether it be special or the general that might occur
Yeah,
in
and with the
November or-
July dates would be the November election, which is
Okay.
council's regular, the city's regular election, so.
Right, exactly. So that's certainly at least a possibility, if I understand correctly, that it might not be.
That's what
till that
Councilmember
time
Smith
frame.
has thrown out there.
I wanted to just mention something quickly that we've touched on some, but just to kind of emphasize that there has been a lot of work, and some of you may have taken advantage of some of this, I don't know. There's been a lot of work that has occurred in Pueblo. They've had their group has been in place for 4 years, I believe Steve said. The City Council, the Electric Utility Commission in Pueblo, and others have really been looking closely at this issue for quite some time. They funded a Phase 1 study to try to figure out, does it even make sense to consider moving away from Black Hills when we get to that point in our franchise when we can legally move away? So they have that Phase 1 study. They're now, I guess, considering doing a Phase 2 study that would dig way deeper into the numbers. And I just want to be sure that we all understand that Canyon City, whether it's council or community, can benefit what Pueblo has been doing and could probably participate more in that in some fashion, whether financially, I don't know if you'd want to do that, but in some ways you could participate more in that, because I think we will learn just as Pueblo will learn from the results of those studies. I did have one quick question, if I could. I'm just not clear. Has Black Hills suggested that they, or implied or hinted that they would stop collecting the franchise fee at some point?
I think going into the election, they're not going to imply that, but if we, that's tenuous.
I think, no, is the short answer to
They
your
haven't.
question. But there's no guarantee that they won't change their position if the city pushes an election out further and further.
So you're, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but just so I understand, you're thinking that if you went with a time frame that put it on the November ballot, that you wouldn't face that kind of threat or whatever you want to call it from the company?
I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I would just say, no, they have not indicated that at this time. We have not had election timing discussions with them, to my knowledge. So we haven't even had that talk.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Emily. Mr. Meisner?
Thank you. Again, a big thanks to all of you for taking time out of your lives to show up and speak your mind and to give us information. But I would at least maybe throw out one suggestion to council. I think we've done our due diligence in terms of trying to come up with an agreement that addresses the things that council believes that we have control over. And I think we in terms of Caitlin and John have done an outstanding job of that, and we've got something in hand. The issue at question is maybe whether the 1% does or does not make sense. That's probably up for negotiation, but I would suggest council move forward with two things. One is move forward with the current agreement, with or without the 1%, for a November ballot. And two, We also propose a utility occupation tax ballot question at the same time. I assume that we can do that because it can't be one question. It has to be separate questions.
Correct, separate questions.
To try to cover our bases from a standpoint that if the voters decide they don't want a franchise agreement, which is their option, they can decline that. Hopefully, those voters would then decide that we're not going to have a franchise agreement, but we're going to have occupation tax instead. That gives us some options. So, I mean, that's my suggestion, is to put 2 questions out and let's get moving.
Ms. Smith?
And I am mostly in favor of going out of November. We've been working on this over a year already. The only reason why I might consider doing a spring election is only a couple months down, later in the road, but it also gives us an opportunity to utilize our citizen survey and kind of ask our citizens, what do you think of a 1% underground fee? Would you support an occupation tax if the franchise wasn't voted? And that would kind of give us a better climate for where our citizens are. But I'm welcome for comment from council.
I just want to make sure we have sufficient time to educate the public that they are not voting on whether or not Black Hills is our energy provider. They are voting on a franchise agreement. And I think that people are going to see Black Hills on that ballot and go, I don't like my energy bill, I do not want this, and not realize that that's not really what they're voting on. So whatever time frame allows us the ability to educate the public as much as we can so that we can define that distinction and they understand what they're voting on.
Emily,
so what's your preference on the time frame?
I mean, if we think we can do that by November, by all means. I think somebody had said at one point, and I don't remember if it was Catherine or who we were talking to, but they had said that typically when you have a special election, people pay more attention to the question, whereas when you have it as part of a general election, it's just another question, and I think people tend to get less worked up about it. So knowing that, I think if we're wanting to pass this franchise fee, it would be more in our favor to do it on a general election rather than singling out the question on a special election where people have an opportunity to really look at it and stress over it and misunderstand it.
Emily?
I just wanted to comment quickly on something Councilman Meisner said. I know that it can be a challenge and maybe not even legally possible to put these 2 issues on the ballot at the same time, to renew a franchise, and if that fails, to have a substitute fee, the utility occupation tax. And I think that way back years ago that was the reason, or one of the reasons, I should say, that Boulder didn't try to do that instead they did not ever put the franchise renewal on their ballot and instead just put this substitute tax in there. And Excel had not threatened to stop collecting the franchise fee, but they preempted that issue. So that's just, I'm not sure, the legal minds would have to figure out if you can actually do both on one ballot.
And I can clarify that. I do not believe Boulder is required to send their franchise fee to the franchise to the electors. It's a very unusual provision that Canyon has. Most entities do not refer their franchises. So my guess is Boulder didn't have to refer the franchise.
I think they did in the past when I talked with them, but they just chose to not have
Can we ask the professional here who's raising his hand?
Yeah, no worries. So before 1986, you were required to submit all franchises to the electorate. In 1986, that was removed from the Colorado Constitution. And so after that point, it's up to municipalities whether the franchise goes to the people. I am not 100% on whether Boulder had it in it or not. I suspect it probably didn't, but with something we can certainly check on. But it is unusual in this day and age that Canyon City has this provision that goes to a vote.
Yeah, Florence does not. Florence has already passed. It just went to council for approval. Mr. Meisner?
Right. Yeah, have the option. We're just talking about home rule.
Home rule,
These
yes.
are different from non-home rule.
Mr. Meisner?
The issue still comes down to, from my perspective on council, the franchise agreement, we still have some options and flexibility. I personally do not believe that if Pueblo proceeds with their process, they're not going to have an alternative in place within 10 years. That's my personal opinion. As a council person, I also express that. Relative to that, a 10-year agreement still affords us the opportunity and the time to do something at the end of 10 years. We also have the option to do something during the 10 years. But we can play with this thing for the next 3 months and still not be any further than we are tonight. We need to, we've done our due diligence. We need to move forward. Either not present the ballot, the franchise agreement to the ballot and just opt for a utility tax, or if it's possible, offer the voters both. That you opt for a franchise fee or you opt for a utility tax. But we need to move forward. We're not going to solve this in the next 6 months.
Okay. Anything else?
The one question I have, and I understand, and I kind of agree what you're talking about. The thing is, if we put them both on the ballot and they both fail, where are we at?
You're without a franchise agreement and without a utility occupation tax.
So that's, that's a possibility. We
It
could-
kind of wipes the slate clean,
Okay.
and Black Hills is still your energy provider.
Okay.
Does Pueblo have a franchise at all?
Yes.
It expires
Currently.
in 2020.
Okay, you're right. So it sounds like we're waiting for Pueblo to make our decision.
Yeah.
And I'm not thrilled with that. I think you're going to be 16,000 people against, how big is Pueblo? So they'll be making decisions for Canyon City. That's not real cool in my opinion. So, but that's what it looks like. You're waiting, you want us to wait until they make their decision so we can make our decision. Isn't that what you want? Do you think that's responsible? That's what I've heard.
Can I just quickly
Yes,
comment
please,
on
go right
that?
ahead.
My understanding is that they're going to vote soon on whether to do a Phase 2 study. They've done the Phase 1 study. They paid for that. They got the results that, as was mentioned earlier, showed a 10 to 12% savings for utility customers, conservatively speaking. I think in the very near future, maybe in May, they're going to decide whether to do that Phase 2 study. If the council over there votes in May to not do that, there may not be a whole lot that's happening in Pueblo, but they're also looking here to see what Canyon City is doing. So there's this interrelationship among all the ratepayers throughout the whole service area. So it's our point of view is not that, oh, we should do what Pueblo does. I just think we need to be cognizant of the impacts here if Pueblo does do something different and does move away over time from Black Hills. And what does that mean for our city?
And I had a long discussion with Mayor Gradishar. I'm not sure they know what they're doing.
I'm sorry.
I'm not sure they know what they're doing.
Well, they're the officials, so they're going to do something.
Okay?
I don't think you mean that in a negative manner.
I don't mean that in negative fact. That's what our conversation was. But it seems like you want us to wait until they make a decision so I'm not sure that's real responsible. On the other hand, I'm not interested in doing it in November either. I think it should be a special election in the spring. I get your point, Ms. Cochran. I got that. But it's going to be a lot of stuff on the ballot. And I think it should be a clear vote on one issue or two, and that's that. And you can have more discussions on it. The discussion that we had was, how in the world on earth we're going to get $40 million? And I know someone said they'll just write a check for it. We're available, and so are they. Nobody's given us any overtures. And you can fret on it all you want. That's a fact. Kathy, go ahead.
Just a small clarification. You're right. Nobody has come and offered to write a check for you at $40 million. That is because you, as a council representing the city of Canyon City, can put out the request. They cannot come to you. You can send out a request for them.
We don't have a franchise with them.
You have a right to put out what I would, and I've been retired too long, can't think of the right term, but it's like a request for proposal is basically what you're asking for.
Right.
And that means you send that out as a broad spank, hey, we'd like to see what you can offer us as a city to provide us the distribution, the wholesale electricity, and the ability to make sure that we have linemen in place to run it for us.
Okay.
You can do that.
Yes, we can.
So I'm just saying that's why nobody has come and offered you a check, is that you have to be the proactive person.
Okay. Go ahead.
John, maybe you could answer this. Did we not have conversations with other utilities, specifically San Isabel, about potentially their ability to service us? And it's not like we've exclusively just talked with Black Hills. I mean, we've had conversations with other providers, and if I remember correctly, San Isabel was not capable at this time.
I would not characterize whether they are or they're not. But there have been discussions with San Isabel to understand what they may be able to do for us.
So, if you guys are so confident that somebody else could do a better job, start talking to some other utility companies. It's not like Black Hills is the only company we've spoken to, but right now they're the only company that's been able to do anything with us.
Ms. Smith?
I just want a clarification from Tony. Have we already decided in stone what our questions on the citizen survey will be this summer? Or is there still options to?
Oh, no, we can add. I was going to bring you back, those lists of policy questions for your May 20th meeting. So clearly we could add that question.
Because I'd like to hear from the council,
When does that-
November or spring.
When does that go out?
Okay, I'm in agreement with Ms. Cochran here. I think it would behoove us whether we put one on the ballot or two on the ballot to actually have a special election, and then that gives us more time to educate the public the best we can before that election comes about. And I don't have a problem with putting them both on the ballot, but I think it probably works to the best interest of the council, the citizens of that. Let's go ahead and let it go and put up a special election next year, when we're the only thing on the ballot.
Ms. Cochran?
Oh, that was from.
That was an old button?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Meisner?
Frank distracted me.
So that's no questions?
I lost it.
All right. In the interest of concluding, are you standing to ask something? Would you like, you got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. And by the way, Buffy McFadden, Canyon City resident. I appreciate putting into the franchise agreement that when Black Hills files for a rate increase or a rate change, that's in the franchise agreement. But in a cooperative partnership, why did we have to demand that they inform our community of a rate change? Now, you can see those at the PUC, but I just want us to think about, when is this partnership going to be a two-way street? They utilize our right-of-ways in the city of Canyon City to provide power beyond our boundaries. That's our property as a city. That's our leverage. We're not without leverage in this conversation. And I do believe, and I hope the attorney can address this, I don't believe that other utilities can directly come to the council as a whole under the certification process under the PUC to offer more services.
Yes, sir.
This is one of the issues with trying to court another electric utility, is that there are certificated areas that each utility has at the PUC. In order to basically get rid of that certificated area, the other utility has to prove that the current utility is not capable of serving. It's an extremely high bar and is not often reached in these types of cases. So really the only option is to condemn the existing system and then give it to someone else to run. But those condemnation costs would be on the city.
Correct, thank you. And I believe that was the point that Ms. Worthington was trying to make, a request for information or a request out in the legal formatted way can happen when we're out of a franchise agreement, is my understanding. And that's one of the things that could be done to find out if there are better options from already formed utilities or utility providers, rather than just going to municipalization. Thank you. I smile too, that's a tough word, municipalization. But either way, and I don't believe anybody is saying do what Pueblo does. I'm a proud Canyon City resident, a recovering Puebloan. But they are the largest ratepayer base that Black Hills has. If they decide to leave, and they can do it in less than 10 years, it will impact us undoubtedly. And we're not like Wholesome Cement that's a large enough consumer that can actually negotiate directly with Black Hills. We can't do that as consumers. That's why we're all here. I know we like to see you, Mr. Mayor, on a Wednesday night. But we're here because we feel that it's so important. It's a 10-year agreement, and yes, it's better than the 25-year agreement, and we appreciate that, but can we do better is the question.
Council, we wrap it up, or Jared, do you have a slight comment to make?
Thank you for letting me speak one more time. A couple of things. It concerns me to hear my council saying that they want to move on the thing that's the easiest to do, which is you're familiar with an election, and so, hey, let's get going. It concerns me that if the election goes down, then we're right back here in this room again talking about what do we do now? Where do we go next? And so I would really caution that we try to explore those things and put out a bid, if you will, for other options to be brought forward. Whatever mechanism that has to be done through in order to do it properly. But we clearly, I think, have identified that we don't have enough information as a city to make an informed decision that'll take us to the future. And I think we have the expertise and the motivation to really put some energy into that. And maybe we are the people we've been waiting for to do that. One other thing I wanted to ask, it looks like the utility occupation tax is a regulated tariff through the PUC. So I am not fully understanding how that works and why it would have to go to a ballot. So I would just throw that out and say, hey, maybe we need to get some more information about that too. Thank you.
Would you like me to address that? So the city, as a local government, may impose a utility occupation tax. It doesn't go through the PUC. It has to go to the voters because of Tabor. So.
It's a tax.
Tax.
That nasty word.
If it's already a tariff within the PUC, is there another mechanism?
This is a separate local government power. I'm not sure what you're referring to, but the city has a separate local government power to impose this tax.
That's wonderful. I'm just wondering if there is something in place that I'm not knowledgeable about already within the PUC. I mean, clearly it's the city's property that the utility is paying to use. And why we would have to impose a tax to charge rent, if you will, to the utility to use our property is something that I don't have a full understanding of.
Jerry, there you go, being logical,
Okay, let's move forward. Let's, shall we poll everybody? Mr. Meisner.
Forget it. I'm good.
Mr. Meisner, go ahead.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So let's go forward and see where we want, let's talk about election. When do you want to do that? What do you think?
November.
For me, that's kind of a close question. I would not be unhappy if we went with November, but I also understand the single ballot issue, and I think that has some virtue. If I had to make a decision right now, I guess I'd go for a single ballot issue.
I think single ballot issue. Go ahead.
I'm inclined for spring.
I would say November.
I'm in favor of a single ballot issue.
I'll go with the majority.
Well,
With what?
Majority.
what's the majority? Do I make the decision?
No.
What?
Denise, did you keep record?
Okay, single ballot issue, raise your hand.
Heads up, 7 up?
3, 4.
4. Okay. November. Okay.
Just 2.
Looks like we're going to discuss a single ballot issue in spring. Okay? Any last comments from, no?
Can we at least get some direction in terms of the validity of the not dual question, but yeah, 2 questions on that in terms of, is there interest in asking about the utility occupation tax?
What kind of clarification you want? Can we do it, or would it be
Well,
on?
from council, in terms of, I realize everybody wants to do a survey, but we all know the value of surveys. They give us an indication, but they don't guarantee us anything. And we've already seen that, and other cities have seen that in terms of, most recently, Grand Junction. But my concern, I don't think, whatever we do, we still have 10 years. Because that's how long it's going to take somebody to do something. In the meantime, there's always the possibility that I'm going to have to deal with, assuming I run for re-election, a $500,000 deficit in our budget next year. That's a real possibility that we have to at least deal with. At any particular point in time, Black Hills could say, we're no longer going to collect that fee and pass it on.
Okay. Ms. Gonzalez?
So I have a question. Pueblo is seeking out to do their own public utility
Oh,
company.
they're still doing studies.
Studies, but, well, what I'm getting at is do they have a franchise agreement with Black Hills right now?
Yes.
So you can do that while you have a franchise agreement? There's nothing binding you from looking for other options?
Yes. We could do agreement and then also implement a process, somebody, to look at options.
So we can open up a market saying what other utility company would be willing to service our area
Absolutely.
with the franchise agreement in place?
And not just any franchise agreement, but they're saying don't have any franchise agreement at all, but that's an old 25-year
Sure.
document that's way out of date, at least in the next 10 years as we're doing explorations and seeing what happens with the market in our region. At least we have a beefed up franchise agreement that it better represents and takes care of our citizens.
Sure.
Okay. Was that your comment, Ms. Smith?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Conclusion is that we'll go forward with the possibility of a special election in the spring.
Well, and I think Jim was wanting to know if we were interested in a two-question ballot.
What I would say about that is that we don't have to make that decision tonight. I mean, we've got lots of time to consult with our attorney and see and receive more information.
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest. We can provide you more information about that tax, and you're going to have lots of conversations about that as well. So we can just start that process again.
Okay. Any other comments of council? You're getting close, Emily.
Can we just ask we're not clear what spring means?
What?
Like month and year, what are you looking at?
March?
Of next year?
Sure.
Roughly? Okay.
Yeah,
We're
so
just-
the readings could potentially start in January.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, that helps.
So that
because
gives you, that
Spring
gives you quite
has
a bit of time.
sprung, and so we weren't sure.
Just with
Tuesday after the first Monday.
just with one caveat, it's really hard to predict what else will be going on at the city, and so just so you know, that might move around a little bit.
That's true. They could have a whole new council starting in January.
Yeah, so.
Who knows what could happen?
We understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? We're adjourned.